Joining us here in the Situation Room, Queen Noor of Jordan. Your Majesty, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you, Wolf.
How worried are you that the violence in Iraq is going to spill over into Jordan, for example? Because as you know, there are almost 1 million Iraqi refugees have fled to Jordan over the past 4 years?
There are about 2 million Iraqi refugees outside Iraq in neighboring countries. Jordan has almost 1 million. Syria is assumed to have about 1 million. Others in Lebanon, Turkey, Egypt. They are a tragic case themselves, the fastest growing humanitarian crisis in the world, the state of Iraqi refugees and internally displaced people. And
in addition to the 2 million who have fled, there's other millions within Iraq,
about 2 million
who have been
internally
displaced. Right.
And so they're very vulnerable within the country. And the 2 million outside are seeking shelter. Jordan has a tradition of providing shelter to refugees over the ages, and we are doing the best we can, but we're spending almost $1 billion a year now on the refugees. Hundreds of millions are being spent by Syria and other countries that are trying to take them in. It's an enormous drain on infrastructure, but also on our economy.
A lot of these Iraqis, though, who have come to Jordan are relatively well-to-do. They brought their money with them, and many of them are professionals.
You can't deny that there has been a contribution to our economy in some respects, also driving up property and other prices, which is a great strain on others in the country. But there are also an enormous, increasing number who don't have those resources now, and who need all the help they can get.
Let's talk about your proposal. Let's reclaim Mother's Day for peace. I firmly believe, you're right on CNN.com, that peace will only come to the region when mothers find their voice and say of the violence, enough is enough. Tell us how mothers in the Middle East can do that, given the history, the culture, the religious, all the problems that are underway right now.
Well, there are already many, many mothers, women, and young women in the Middle East who are working together across conflict lines and within their own communities to try to promote reconciliation, to highlight the common values, the shared aspirations that men, women, and children share across conflict lines in our region. But women have a special capacity.
Do they have the clout, though?
Because well, they should, because the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, once was asked by one of his followers, who is it that I should look up to the most? Who is it that I should give the greatest attention to? The Prophet replied, your mother. And then who? Your mother. And then whom? Your mother. And then whom? Your father. The Prophet and his followers in early Islam placed enormous value on the role of women. Economically, socially, and politically, they were given rights to contribute in the society that people were still struggling for in the West. That's been obscured by politics in recent times, but those are the facts of our faith.
Because when we take a look at the role of women in much of the Middle East, it looks like they're downtrodden, they're dominated clearly by men, and they don't have the wherewithal to, they certainly don't have equal rights, shall we say.
Well, they have enormous wherewithal. That is constrained in many communities, not in Jordan. Jordan is not the only country where women have equal rights under the Constitution and have since the 1950s, and have equal right to work and to contribute, and are present at all levels of government and have been for decades.
But Jordan may be unique in that sense.
Not unique. There
Lebanon,
are other countries, but yes, you're absolutely right.
But Saudi Arabia, if you take a look at, and certainly some of the trends we see unfolding in Iraq right now, in Afghanistan, elsewhere in the region, certainly in Iran, you see the opposite.
Those are very dangerous trends. They're very contradictory in terms of the teachings of our faith and the rightful role of women in it. That's politics, and it's so often the case that women are the early victims in negotiations over political issues in a region like ours and often in others. But there are women, not only in Jordan, but in other regions of the world, the Middle East and elsewhere, who are actually leading the process for reconciliation, for peace. There are women in Ireland who, in fact, George Mitchell credited with having persisted even when male negotiators left the room.
What should we be doing, those of us on the outside, looking into the Middle East, Mother's Day approaching this Sunday. What should Americans specifically be trying to do to ease this situation over there?
Well, we celebrated Mother's Day, the first day of spring in Jordan. You celebrated on Sunday. It was originally in the United States called Mother's Day for Peace, and that was the idea of a woman, Julia Howe, in 1870, I think it was, who, seeing the devastation of the Civil War and then of the Franco-Prussian War in Europe, decided it was time to unify women in the struggle for peace. And so American Mother's Day is, in fact, Mother's Day for Peace. That's its origin. And I think American mothers, as well as mothers throughout the world, have the ability to contribute, to support one another, to insist that policymakers focus on investing in the kinds of programs and projects, whether in Iraq or elsewhere in the Middle East, that will empower women and local communities to become self-reliant economically, but also to contribute their voices in decision-making. And that so often comes, especially where women are concerned, through the ability to participate economically. So the King Hussein Foundation, which I run since my husband's death, focuses particularly on women developing the skills and the opportunities, the microfinance capability, and the networks that cross cultures and cross conflict lines, where their voices can be amplified, and where a woman's natural instincts towards peace and security for her children, for the next generation, can play the role that they deserve in peacemaking and conflict recovery and prevention of its recurrence.
I was privileged to have interviewed King Hussein on several occasions, a true visionary. If only there were more leaders like him in the world would be much better off.
Well, mothers can help to develop those generations of leaders. If the mothers themselves are invested in these conflict-riven communities and able then to pass on to their children a measure of hope, a measure of a sense of possibility, and the basic talents and skills that will enable them to contribute.